Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tenpenny Files. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. The Tenpenny Files isn't just another interview show. I hold daily discussions with guests whose research reveals evidence that challenges the official narratives that you read in common headlines. Topics span the spectrum from national government, history, astronomy, and travel, to food and fitness, to health policy and vaccines, and to authors who write about faith and biblical principles. I want to introduce you to topics that you've never heard of before, or topics you always wish that you had time to explore, but just didn't take the time. For listeners ready to question the stories they've been told and to find out what is hidden behind the curtain, the Tenpenny Files is the place for you. We air every day, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. on AmericaOutloud.news and iHeartRadio. And if you've missed some of our discussions in the past, you can go to various podcast platforms and find them. But I want to introduce you to authors and documentary filmmakers that have something important to say and often have been silenced or censored. But before I introduce you to today's guest, I want to encourage our listeners to go to become a Tenpenny Prime member. You can get the benefit of monthly papers, recorded presentations, and an Ask the Expert masterclass once a month. Go to primembership.drtenpenny.com, click on the membership tab, and learn more about us, and hopefully you will join us. So let's jump right into today's conversation with my special guest, GregRogers, to talk about his book, Created, The Devil's Apprentice, a speculative theological novel that explores the origin of evil, free will, and divine restraint through a story rather than doctrine. Greg, thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
You know, I'm excited to have this conversation. What originally led you to explore the origin of evil and Satan's fall through a novel rather than through theology or through a documented historical book or something like that? Why did you create it as a novel?
You know, it's interesting. It actually didn't start off as a novel. It started off as a real life conversation with a friend of mine as I went out online and got into conversations, as many people do, with people of different faiths and different belief systems. And in my case, I was speaking with an individual who had been in my Sunday school class who had become an atheist, unbeknownst to me. And so I was looking for ways to actually have a conversation with him and answer some of his questions and challenges that he put to my faith. And what I didn't know was that he was going to start tagging me into conversations with a large number of other individuals. And before I knew it, I'm having a conversation with about 100 other atheists. And so as that conversation progressed, what I thought was going to be something that would last just for a few days turned into a 6 month conversation. And before I knew it, I was thinking about, hey, seems to be having an impact, this conversation. How could we include more people in that, since most people aren't going to sit for 6 months and listen to a theological discussion?
And then you sort of kind of heard this in this script in your head, and you told me the first time we spoke that you just sat down and started writing, that you'd never written anything before. Tell us about that journey.
That's right. Yeah, it was interesting. I sat down, and at first, again, never having written anything, I just started saying, well, who could I emulate if I was going to try to write something that would be for a broader audience than would probably listen to a 6 month discussion. And the first thing that jumped into my head was the Left Behind series with Jerry Jenkins, and how he presented information and a storyline related to Revelation and the end times prophecies. In my case, I was going to be talking about creation and why would God create angels, and how did Lucifer kind of go through his fall. But it was a similar kind of a pathway. So I thought that might be the best way to go about writing it. What was interesting was before I ever, as I'm talking about creation, before I get to the story of Adam, I've written 1,700 pages, and I'm
Oh,
like, okay, wait a minute, this is a little bit more than I was bargaining for when I first got started.
well, you also there's a section in there when Lucifer is gathering up his angels that are going to rebel. they're all these names, like all really weird names that, would be like old Hebrew type names. Where did you come up with all of those names?
It was fascinating, and sometimes it was a little bit nerve-wracking because I'd be writing late at night after work, and I was trying to make this as realistic as possible because I knew I was going to be speaking to people that were trying to seek truth in many cases, and so I wanted to be as close to real as possible. So I started going out and looking up like the Satanic Bible and looking up the names of actual demons and looking and seeing, okay, what are their characteristics? What would they rule over? What would they be involved with if they were actually dealing with a specific issue with humans or with angels? And so that's how I came up with the names. And it was fascinating in studying about those names, just how closely they tied to the issues that we were dealing in the books.
Well, you've got Moloch in there, and a lot of really evil, evil characters that we know from the Christian Bible. But
Yeah.
the way that you read this story together of of Lucifer being just sort of a crafty moral agent, and I'm telling you that when he tries to make his arguments of why we should stop worshiping God, and we should be able to be allowed to do what we want and to honor self. Other if we don't be able to do what we want, we're nothing more than slaves to God. The way that you wrote that, those arguments were so pervasive or persuasive. I mean, so persuasive that you kind of felt like when you're Malachi was who the character that he was kind of convincing to come and follow him. You're like, yeah, he's kind of right, And then
Right.
then you like wait. You say, wait a minute, wait. But it's so persuasive.
Right. I wanted to make sure I did something that I think doesn't happen in a lot of dealings with Satan or dealing with the demons. It's really easy to see the enemy when he's definitively evil and definitively, like a caricature of something that we would naturally say no to. But we got to remember a lot of my conversations at that time in dealing with it, I'm talking with atheists and Muslims and people of other faiths who are making really good arguments. And I thought it was important to make sure that what I wrote for Satan was actually a strong argument as well. And in truth, it's his argument is not unlike what you hear from atheists and Muslims and others as they present theirs. I think we as Christians sometimes can jump in and say there is no argument that anyone else can make that actually is persuasive. And in truth, I think Satan, part of the reason why he hangs in there and thinks that he has a chance at winning is because his argument is persuasive. It just happens to be wrong. So,
Well, you do a really great job of really putting words in Satan's mouth, I guess you can say. We're in Lucifer's mouth in terms of being really persuasive. And then the struggle that Malachi went through of like, well, that isn't right. But wait, it sounds like maybe, yeah, maybe I can do both, is kind of the persuasive argument that you make there. How did you come with such good language for that?
I think a lot of it, well, is again, a lot of it comes from conversations that are real life conversations that I have with people. And so a lot of it is trying to play on how would I have a conversation with them and how are they having a conversation with me. But then secondly, really, I just went to the Bible and I would look and see, okay, what were the kind of common arguments that people were making with Jesus? And oftentimes they aren't coming at Jesus with something that you would look at and say naturally from a perspective that they hold to would be illogical. The problem is their perspective, not necessarily their argument. And I think that's what we see in real life with people that come and talk to us. Their argument is strong, oftentimes, but it's strong within their perspective in their worldview. And unless their worldview can be corrected, actually they sound really pretty much spot on.
One of the major themes in your book, Created the Devil's Apprentice, is that God does not prevent rebellion, even though he could. Why
Mhm.
does he allow that risk? And why does he let it go on for so long?
I think this is one of the things that maybe is a little bit different in terms of the way I went about looking at the story itself. Most people think of Satan as rebelling, and he's rebelling just simply over pride. And I try to look at it and say, okay, if it was just simply over pride, then why would God create that individual in the first place? There had to be a reason to create Satan and or Lucifer and all of the other demons to begin with that had nothing to do with had to do with what God was, not what they were. And so when you look at God and you try to ask that question, I think you come to a conclusion that he had to be compelled, but be compelled from within himself. Nothing outside of himself would drive him. So what was the thing that probably God was creating the angels for? I went to that verse that basically talks about that God inhabits the praises of Israel. And I looked at that and I said, well, if he's able to inhabit the praises of people, could he not do the same thing with angels? And if that's the case, then this thing is all about worship, but not really about worship from the standpoint of God needing a pat on the back. He doesn't have an ego that needs to be stroked. There need to be something within praise that was necessary or not necessary, not really necessary, but that he would desire. And for me, that looked like he would be able to experience himself in a way that he would never be able to experience himself unless beings were created that actually did worship him. So I think this is about worship and the fact that God um, experiences himself in a way that he doesn't without us being there.
Hmm. I think I've heard that perspective before, but maybe not really understood it fully. It's like, why would God just all he just wants us to worship him? Because when you think about that from a human perspective, if I just wanted somebody to worship me, it would be all about
Mhm.
ego that I would make me
Right.
feel good about myself because somebody was saying good things or singing praises or whatever. But God doesn't work that way.
That's right.
Why is it different?
Well, it's different because with us, we're imperfect. He's perfect. And part of being perfect in the way that God is, it's perfect in all ways at all times. So it's some of those things that are involved in his perfection are being perfectly content within himself. So we actually write as Christians oftentimes that the reason why God is seeking worship is to be glorified. He doesn't need our to be glorified. He is perfectly content within himself. He doesn't need our glory. He doesn't need our love. He doesn't need anything that relates to us. And if that's the case, then the only thing that he would be looking at would be if I'm perfectly content within myself, the only thing to actually grab for or to look for more would be, is there a way to actually have more of myself? So from God's perspective, it at least as we as kind of people look at these things, it would be that he would be looking and saying, could I experience more of myself? And if I created beings that worship me and I could inhabit their praise, then that would be a way that I could experience myself in a little bit different way. So,
And in your book, excuse me, in your book, Lucifer wanted to assume, the holy mount and to not just be equal with God, but to overthrow God. And
right.
you go through this, they have this celestial battle, this big battle that goes on. I think I was a little, what made me was thinking is like, why did God let that go on for so long? That so many people were injured, so many angels were injured on both sides and killed, and all the stuff that happened, just like here on the planet, some
Hmm.
war that would happen. But suddenly then, at one point God says basically enough.
That's enough. Right.
Why do you think he lets battles like that go on for so long?
Well, again, if everything circulates around worship, then you have to remember that worship is a choice and it's a free will choice. And so if God was to step in on anyone's decision and say, "Hey, look, I'm going to stop things and bring to a halt," like if he was to step in before every angel had made their own decision about whether or not they were going to follow him or follow self, then in essence, they would have a reason to question the judgment that was against them. Hey, I was never given the chance or never had the opportunity to make a final decision. You made it for me. And so I think in that case, what I wrote it as is that God let it go on until they actually reached the point where everyone had made their own decision as to what they were going to do with God, whether they were going to follow him or not follow him. If not, there's a reason for an excuse for the judgment and to say why they should not be judged.
Which is just kind of the opposite of the argument that Lucifer was trying to do, particularly then, because they go in and they have a trial. And,
Mhm.
and all of the angels that were fallen had a trial. And then, Lucifer was making his last arguments and kind of basically saying to God, you just want, you say that you've given us free will, but
Yeah,
actually what you just want us to worship you. So actually we're slaves, but
right.
miss the whole point. And the
Yes.
way that you crafted that all together was really masterful. It was
Thank you.
really, really good. Like I said, I don't read much fiction, but this didn't even really read like a fiction book. It read like a story that you were like an observer, like a reporter that you were sitting off to the side writing this something that you were seeing, which was just amazing.
Right.
Without really giving away any spoilers, because I really want readers to read this book. It is
Great.
um it's kind of life changing because it gives you a completely different perspective on what really could have happened, what could have been happening. Because we talk about that we don't fight in flesh and blood, but we fight powers and principalities and all these things. And you could see it in your book. And you have
Right.
a chart in the front of this various different heavens that helps you kind of explain all of those different things. Without giving away anything, a spoiler, what do you
Mhm.
readers often misunderstand about the fall of Satan that you think this story really reframes?
I think probably the biggest thing that they look at is they think that Satan was actually wanting to set himself up to be God, per se, from the standpoint of I want to rule, I want to be king, and there may have been some of that, but I think it had much more to do with whose will is actually considered to be the standard of perfection. Because if Satan is not able to choose his will, if he's in a position where he has to do what God's will is in order to remain in good standing and not be subject to hell or be subject to some kind of judgment, then the thing that he has to do is actually do what it takes to be the standard of perfection. And in heaven, that is to be on the throne and to be the king. And so I think we think of him as saying, I'm going to usurp the throne. I think what he's trying to usurp is to be the standard of perfection so that he can actually be the one that everyone has to be subject to in that regard. So, and I think part of that it goes back to if you think about God being perfectly loving, perfectly just, perfectly compassionate, and all those things, then we know that angels can't be redeemed. So the only way that God could have, in justness and compassion, been able to present something to the angels as a way of escape would have been before they had fallen to actually try to give them an out. And I think that out must have been that he probably went to them and said, "Hey, look, the way for you to not experience judgment is until I can set up the mechanism that will reconcile heaven and earth to myself, meaning Jesus Christ's death on the cross. Until that happens, the angels were probably asked as a volitional choice and an act of worship to give up their free will until that was actually put into place. And Lucifer said, wait a minute, I'm created in a way that I'm perfect. I can be perfectly compatible with you now. What makes you more perfect than me other than that you were the one that created? If you're perfect and I'm compatible with perfection, then why isn't my will good enough? So I think that's probably the pathway that actually went down. And when we talk about Satan as having pride, it's not pride in that he wants to be the king. It's that pride as in, why isn't my will good as just as good as yours?
And is
So
that the argument you used kind of heard from the Satanist and atheist sort of group that you were talking to for all those months?
No, actually, that came through a lot of prayer and a lot of just seeking from a logic standpoint and looking at the Bible and seeing what seems to have transpired. It seemed to jump out that that was actually probably what took place. And so I was trying to actually follow scripture as to how do I come up with what was transpiring. So,
And eventually, after I think you told me when we spoke a while back that you had this conversation with this atheist
mhm.
for like 6 months, and
Yes.
eventually a lot of them became Christians. Is that right?
That's right. It was fascinating because at first I thought we were just going to have this conversation for a short period of time. We went for 4 months. I was doing, again, it started off in creation. And so I started off by giving all the thoughts that I had around intellectual, intelligent design and creation science and all of those kinds of arguments. And after 4 months, none of them were actually budging. And so I started really praying about it and saying, okay, God, how do you bring someone over from this mindset to you? And I felt like you said, why don't you stop trying to argue them into the kingdom and why don't you start listening a lot more? And then why don't you instead um, take what they do are talking about and walk them backwards from there? So I started listening to their arguments, then break out the scriptures and show them how, hey, what you're saying may actually be what's transpiring. And in which case they started saying, well, I don't know if that's the real way that it happened, but if it's possible that it happened that way, then I can't hide behind this argument anymore. And so we started taking steps forward based on what they were thinking and how scripture may have lined up with it, which was a very different way, a very different tack to take. So,
And once there was the first, a lot of times when you're in a group like that, there's like the first one that changes
mm,
the mind and converts. But there's a video that goes around that has gone around out on the internet. It's been out for quite a while. I think the last time I looked, it had over 4 million views, and it was
mm,
about this first follower. The first guy that converts or does whatever, he's like this radical guy, and nobody really believes him. But when he gets his first follower, the
yeah,
second guy, now maybe this guy gets legitimatized, that maybe there's something to it. And then at the end of that little movie, the whole group ran down off the hill and were dancing with the crazy shirtless guy. Is that kind of
right.
happened in your circle of your atheist group that you're talking to there?
It's fascinating because it happened over time. It was almost like popcorn popping, if you've ever heard that analogy. It was like the first one popped and nothing really happened. But I remember there came a time when one of them said, "Hey," to my friend, "Hey, leave Greg alone. He's reasonable, he's logical, and you can't argue the data because it's our data." And as soon as that person said it, then I started seeing others dive in. And I think it was in many cases, they had always heard someone presenting a story around creation that they just felt like they couldn't get behind. But suddenly now, when it was their story or their kind of their data, and then they saw that the Bible could be saying that, they started saying, okay, wait a minute, maybe I need to rethink this. I'll be honest with you. I've had a kind of a famous individual in relation to atheism that at one point I was talking to him about one aspect of creation. And he said if the Bible actually does present it that way and it's possible that it's that way, even if it isn't that way, if it's even possible, then I would have to rethink the Bible
Wow.
because all you had to do instead of trying to win the argument with them, all you had to do was show that it was possible that it could be the way that they were thinking. In that case, they couldn't hide behind that argument anymore. So
How
um, and-
how are
yeah,
they thinking? You said the way they were thinking.
it's interesting. And I'll give you specific, and there may be Christians that would argue with me and say, Greg, this is the wrong approach. And all I can say it's an effective approach. The issue of evolution. most people, Christians, or a lot of Christians will say evolution, no, there's no way it can be presented in the Bible. I can show you three different ways that it could be in the Bible. And in fact, not be the methodology, like a lot of Christians will say that God was using evolution. You can't prove that. I think that's probably right. I think what you can maybe show is that it wasn't that God was using it. It's that Satan was using it as being the mechanism he was trying to use in a tit for tat with God taking place during the creation account. When I present it that way to them and they see that, wait a minute, the science could go along as at least as they understand it with what the Bible could be saying, they said, oh, wait a minute, now I might not be able to say that the Bible is wrong. I'm oftentimes will say this. I think sometimes we're fighting the wrong battle. We try to prove a point that, let's face it, most things that we believe are beliefs. They're not absolute certainties. And what we need to do is present them with something that they can believe. And then if it's plausible, then it can actually go against what is their internal outcome, the thing that they see as being the outcome of what that belief would be. We can actually make it show that the Bible actually is something that they should be able to walk with. So,
Wow, how powerful is that? Wow,
yeah.
what a great thought and a great discussion. This is really exciting. I knew it would be. So with that, I want you to hold your thought there for just a second. We're going to take a
Mhm.
quick break so we can hear from our sponsors for AmericaOutloud.news and for the Tenpenny Files. America Out Loud plays the Tenpenny Files on iHeartRadio Network 5 days a week, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen from anywhere in the world by any of the podcasters that are on AmericaOutloud.news by logging into their site, clicking on their media player, and then you can listen through it through the internet from anywhere else in the world. If you've missed any of these great conversations, and we've had a lot of them, and they've been really, really good, if I do say so myself, you can find the Tenpenny Files on Spotify, Pandora, Apple, iTunes, iHeart Virtual Studio, and on my platforms at drtenpenny.com. Just click on the podcast tab. Or we also play them on X, we play them on Rumble, and we play them at drtenpenny.substack.com. Because they are so many great books and so many documentaries with so little time to read and to watch, my idea is to maximize your time and jumpstart your interests. So this is, if you're really looking for something different and off of mainstream, that has intelligent talk, the Tenpenny Files is for you. We're going to hear from our great sponsors next. They're the ones that keep us online, keep America Out Loud on news, AmericaOutloud.news online. So please listen to our sponsors. We will be right back with more with Greg Rogers' book, Created: The Devil's Apprentice. Zeolite is a detox spray. We work specifically with a company called Touchstone Essentials. They are an incredible company. We've been working with them now for several years. And zeolite is a mineral that goes through your body like a one-way basket. It will clean out heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury, aluminum, cadmium, and it hooks onto those metals from a one-way perspective. So once it's bound, it goes out through your urine or your stools and doesn't get redeposited in other places. Everybody needs to have a detox product in their life, and this one is so easy to use and it's so safe. You can take it when you're pregnant, you can take it when you're nursing, you can give it to little children, you can even give it to infants, and quite frankly, I give it to my dog. I actually put a little bit of the zeolite in his water because until we all stop living in a toxic world, we all need to get some of those extra toxicities out. The heavy metals, the persistent organic pollutants, the things that are floating through the air, the different things that we come in touch with in our environment. And we are a big fan of zeolite from Touchstone Essentials. We've been a big fan of their products for several years. Go to drtenpenny.com/detox to get your first bottle of zeolite spray for $50 off.
Well, only when the government bows to the people will America become great again. This is Malcolm Out Loud here. Join me in pushing back against censorship, my fellow Americans. Right at the top of AmericaOutloud.news are the words, many voices, one freedom, united in the First Amendment. Now is our time, my fellow Americans. AmericaOutloud.news, liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome back, everyone. GregRogers is talking about his book today, Created the Devil's Apprentice, a speculative theological novel that explores the origin of evil, free will, and divine restraint through storytelling about the creation of the universe. Let me tell you a little bit more about my guest today, GregRogers. Greg's background includes decades of teaching, theological study, and creative work across writing and visual art. He left a 27-year career in the healthcare industry, spanning from pharmaceuticals to hospital administration, to actively leading an effort to launch a new system of neurological rehabilitation in hospitals and to develop a new helmet to prevent brain injuries among motorcyclists. Then during COVID, Greg created a sidewalk chalk masterpiece artwork in front of his home that really caught his neighbors' attention. Local newscasters and broadcasts went all over the internet, and his work was shown internationally. Greg's his special recognition comes from his theatrical stage design in sets, backdrops, and props. Greg, you have just an incredible, diverse background here. And everything that you've done, we've talked about it before. You say, I never do a picture before. and now you have a whole new career in artwork. I never wrote a book before. And you've written this incredible book. Then there's a series. There's more of these coming along. And I said this at the beginning of the show, and it's really worth repeating for the listeners. I don't read much fiction. I just really don't have time. But this book is so interesting and so real. It comes alive as though it's nonfiction. Tell us more about how it started out to be fiction and then it became nonfiction, because that's a really interesting part of your story.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of it came down to if I had ever written to people anything theological, it was usually again in a nonfiction format. And what you found was that in today's society, most people have a very short attention span. And the things that we were getting into were so deep. I mean, just to give you a taste of it, the real question that's being addressed in this first book is, why would an omniscient God who's perfect in every way create anything that has a will of its own when he knows in advance that it's going to rebel against him? It seems like that would be something that would violate his perfect compassion. I mean, if he knows they're going to rebel and they're going to be destined for hell, and he doesn't need anything and he's perfect, then why would he do anything? And so if you can think about that, that's not like a surfacey question. That's not like, hey, what are the 5 means of growth? If you read your Bible, you pray, you do fellowship and worship and evangelism, then you're going to grow as a Christian. No, I mean, we're getting down in the weeds here. And so, but that was the thing that when I was talking with that atheist group, they came to me and said, if there's one question that if we go back to the very beginning and said, this is the one that we can't find a Christian they could answer, it was that question. And so I literally thought about that question for 3 years as I was trying to work through, and it ended up sending the answer as I had put it together that ends up in this book. I sent it off to Ravi Zacharias' ministry. And I asked them, okay, what do you think about this answer? They told me it was the first answer, other than Augustine's, we'll have to wait till we get to heaven to know, that actually answered the question and did so in a way that didn't seem to go against anything or contradict anything in Scripture or contradict anything about the nature of God. And so when I heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, maybe I've stumbled onto something here, God. Maybe you've opened my eyes to something. But no one's going to sit for 3 years and think about this, or 6 months and think about this. But they might listen to an interesting story that actually showed it. And probably it's interesting that God took me the route of going down being an artist before he took me down the route of being a writer, because he stuck in my head, how would people want to see this and what would it need to look like to dazzle them and make them think, okay, wait a minute, is this really what heaven looks like? Is this what that would look like? And so I write as an artist also when I do this. So
well,
yes.
that's another thing. At the beginning of your book, I think I tabbed it here. You have these, here it is. The 9 choirs of angels.
Yes.
And I know that the listeners can't listen to this, but the podcasters can sort of see it, that there's the first triad or sphere, the second sphere, the third sphere of angels, archangels, and principalities, and then you define all of them
Yeah.
of the different heavens. Did you make this up, or where did you come up with this?
You know, what's interesting is that comes more from the Eastern Orthodox or the Catholic faith.
Oh, wow.
And so they've broken them down into three different spheres and three different groupings or choirs that actually are a part of that. And so that's kind of what I went to it and based it on, was to try to learn that. What's fascinating, another part that you might think about in that regard is the levels of heaven, and that there are different levels of heaven and how they overlap. I actually went to Isaiah 14 and thought about that, where it talks about Satan when he says, I will raise myself above the heavens, I will raise myself above the stars of God, I will place myself in the seat in the assembly. And then he says that he will raise himself above the clouds and he will make himself like the Most High God. I always thought about, why would he raise himself above the clouds if he's already raised himself above the heavens? And it struck me that, is it possible that that would be just like the Holy Spirit or God led the children of Israel by fire by night and by a cloud by day? What if this cloud is actually the Holy Spirit? And then it made it fell from there to thinking, oh, wait a minute, these may be the levels of heaven that actually that Satan is trying to raise himself above and get to the point where he's on the holy mount and he's actually taking up and making himself like the Most High God. And so that was that one. And again, looking at the angels and what they were in terms of their classes, was actually looking at the Eastern Orthodox way of looking at things.
Yeah, because it also goes back to what we sort of mentioned before about we don't fight. We what we fight is powers and principalities, and you've got the different powers, virtues, dominions, thrones, cherubim, and is seraphim, and
Yes.
all the meanings and all the different things. I mean, I dog-eared that page so that I could come back and listen and reference it with the things that you're writing about in the book. Lucifer, at the beginning, he wanted to sit on the left hand of God since Jesus is on the right hand of God.
Right.
And then his whole thing about self and self-importance, and I can create as well as you can because look what I did in the garden. I was the master gardener, so to speak. And
Right.
so then he wanted to overthrow God and be bigger and better than God. Why do you think that? And I think that's probably true, that probably really did happen. Was it just the more importance of self that he would just expand it and said, I don't need you at all. I want to be above you.
Right. Well, and again, I had, when I went to this, I looked at it from the standpoint of what would be the thing that if God was going to offer them a way of escape, it would be to actually ask them to give up their free will for a time until he was able to reconcile, just like it says in Colossians, he would reconcile all things unto himself, both in heaven and on earth. And so if he's reconciling the heavens to himself, that would probably be the angels, and that's done through Christ. Well, then if the angels were going to participate in that, since they can't be redeemed, like if they sin, the wages of sin is death. They're a spiritual being. The only death they could face was an eternal death. So the only way that God could give them a way of escape was actually to say, why don't you give up your free will until that's not a problem? And so I think what Satan comes down and says is, if I'm perfect, then I should be able to live out my standard as well, and it be considered to be perfect also. So I think this is a lot about him saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't want to give up my free will. So,
You represent divine restraint as intentional rather than passive. That God, really, the righteous indignation that you write about, when God finally had enough. How does that shape our free will? If that really is the case, that God has divine restraint and doesn't just come down and say, I've had enough of you critters down here,
right.
all the things that you're doing.
Right. Well, I think with divine restraint, you've got a God who, again, we tend to project onto God whatever the aspect of God is that we want to be perfect at that time, depending on whatever we're talking about. But God, when you think about it, for him to be truly perfect, it means he has to be perfect in all ways at all times. And so, even while he's being perfectly just, he still needs to be perfectly compassionate and perfectly loving at the same time. If he leaves his compassion just to be just, then he's actually not perfect. And so, how does he actually do that? And I think there is an aspect of that restraint that he does, which is a demonstration of his compassion. But it's also if he was to step in and do judgment right away, or didn't give people an opportunity really to make their own decision, then they would be able to step back and say, "Hey, wait a minute, why did you give this person 15 years and only me 30 minutes to make this decision, whatever it may be." There has to be an aspect in which God is perfectly just in all ways and perfectly compassionate at the same time. And so I think that's kind of what we're seeing it play out, in how he goes about handling things.
You set up the storyline of it's like people work for different departments, like the Department of Worship and the Department of Celestial Fellowship. And there's they have like a hierarchy of hiring, and they have to go through an interview process to get a job. Does that really make clear that, when we get to heaven, that we're going to have jobs that we have to do? Or was that just part of your storyline?
Well, I mean, it did go back to the part about it seems like in the book of Revelation, it talks about us as being a part of his governance, or that there were positions and things that people were filling during that time. And to me, it made sense that if it was that way for us being a worship agent, then why wouldn't he have that same kind of a situation going on with the angels as worship agents as well? And so, to me, it makes, again, I think many stories that deal with angels and deal with heaven kind of project this thing as everyone sitting around on a cloud, kind of just playing their harp. And I think that the Bible presents it as a very real life that's going to happen in eternity. And if it's going to be a real life for us, wouldn't it be a real life for every being that is created with a will of its own? And so I thought it made sense to give that to the angels as well.
Well, they worked really hard, and particularly when they got into the war and the battles and all the things that were happening there. You know,
Yes.
without giving away any spoilers, because seriously, to the people who are listening to this book, Created, The Devil's Apprentice, is so important. It'll change the way you think about a lot of things, which I think is your intent, to get people to understand worship and, maybe the creation story from a little different perspective. But you mentioned that you hope that you thought that perhaps people would feel a little unsettled rather than comforted by the end. I personally didn't feel that way,
Hmm.
but what's your thoughts about that?
Well, I think unsettled from the standpoint, I think there's sometimes we kind of in classical Christianity have an answer that is the one that we're kind of taught all along. And I think sometimes what we fail to recognize is that sometimes those same things that we teach actually end up in paradox. And you've probably heard people say, okay, wait a minute, there are going to be some answers that we get to that we say, there's just no way for me to understand this until I get to heaven. And it's going to be it's this mystery that's there. And oftentimes what you hear is people say that verse that says, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts, my ways are higher than your ways. As far as the heavens are above the earth, so are my thoughts and your ways than my ways. That verse, they almost use it as a cop out, I
Mm.
think. I think they use that and say, oh, if I don't understand it now, then it's just a mystery. And I'll just wait till I get to heaven well, God says that he's at work transforming us by the renewing of our minds. He's conforming us to the image of his son. And if that's the case, I think that there are things that he tries to teach us all along that if we just hold our hand up and say, no, that's something that's beyond me. I don't want to think about that. It's too hard to think about. Maybe I don't want to wrestle with that. Then in truth, we could be settling for a God that's a lot lesser than what he really is, and for lessons that he actually has prepared a way for us to understand if we will wrestle with him. So I think people feeling unsettled, maybe it's that they get to the end of it and they think, Greg, you reached too far. Maybe you went beyond what I think is what we've been taught all along in the church or what have you. And what I would throw out to you is that, well, maybe it's not far enough. Because if it really comes down to a matter of me being willing to wrestle with it, well, let's face it, Jacob wrestled to the point where it really affected him physically. It meant something. But out of that, he formed the nation of Israel. And that name change, if you think about what that name means, it means that not only did he wrestle with God, but God was wrestling for him all at once, is what that word means. And so if we just settle back and we say, I'm not going to think about these thoughts because it's too hard, or maybe it goes a little bit against what someone had said was the answer before, well, yeah, the truth is, we may be actually not arguing against the Bible. We're arguing against what Augustine or Aquinas or someone else said. And I hate to say it, but those people aren't the Bible. They were people who put their pants on just the same way that we do and had the ability to be able to think about things. And maybe God wants us to wrestle with some things as well. And perhaps we go further than what Aquinas and Augustine came up with.
Which is amazing. But the leaving the unfinished feeling at the end of the book is because I happen to know there's book 2 and there's book 3 that's coming. So talk about those a little bit.
You bet. The second book right now is under a working title called Created Heaven and Earth. And if you can get past the, hey, okay, why would God create anything with a will of its own? Then you get to the creation story of Genesis and you start asking questions like, what about evolution? What about creation? What about the time gap? Are there gaps? Is it 6 days, 6,000 years? Is it, all those different things. And so that was where the atheist took me. And so I started diving down into the first 5 days of creation with them in the second book, Created Heaven and Earth, and really looking at that. And without trying to give away anything there, but thinking there's an interesting argument there, is you heard me mention about evolution and thinking maybe we might fight the wrong battle. I think sometimes we try to prove to people that aren't believers what it is that we believe. And sometimes, like with evolution, I came to the realization that it wasn't about proving it wrong. It was about proving that it didn't matter. And if you can show that it doesn't matter, that everyone still ends up at the feet of the cross having to make a decision about Jesus Christ, and then what does it matter whether or not it was 6 days and 6,000 years or over billions of years with evolution or not? If we still have to make a decision about Christ, God can work us through all those other details. He can deal with those in his own time. I don't need to be the Holy Spirit for that person on every little detail, but I can point them to the cross and salvation. And so that's kind of what the second book does, is it gets us through those first 5 days of creation and says, maybe we should all think about it a little bit differently. The third book is going to be one called Created Image Bearers, because now we got to deal with the creation of man. And I'm about 27 chapters into that book. I don't want to give anything away with regards to that because there's so many. If you find the first book very interesting, and the second book, I think you will as well. I think the third one will absolutely blow your mind. So I think you're going to find that one to be fascinating.
And you have talked in the past to some people about making this into a movie series. Is that still on the drawing board?
It is. Right now, I've got as an agent Chip Flaherty, who is the founder of Walden Media. He's one of the guys that produced the Chronicles of Narnia movies. And basically what he's told me is if we can get the books to go, then the movies are going to be close behind. So I would say if you're interested in seeing this as a movie, go buy the book.
Yeah, seriously. And everybody that's listening, this book, Created, The Devil's Apprentice by GregRogers. It's It's written so well. It's so vivid. You can actually, it's almost like there's a screenplay going on inside of your head that you're actually watching this movie of what's actually happening and the debates and the arguments and, the spirit flying and all the different things that's happening, the swords, and it's so well written, Greg. It has to become a movie. It just really does. And if the second and third one are as good or better, this is really a biblical story that needs to be told. I think it's just great. So tell us where people can go and find the book. Where's the best place for them to get it?
Right now there's a version of it. The first edition is out on Amazon. So you can go out and buy it. Just look up my name, look that up. I will say I'm in the process right now of doing a second edition of this book that's going to have additional content and things in it. So if you want to go get the first book, the first edition, go ahead. It's out on Amazon. You just can go and click that up, or you can go to my website, and at my website there's a contact page, and I'll direct you over to where you can purchase it as well. Yeah, that's the biggest place is Amazon. So
Well, I always want to know if the authors are selling them themselves. Our books are available on Amazon too, because we don't have a shipping department, but you can get the ebook from us, from that perspective. And if you were selling it yourself, I always tell people, go to Amazon, read a little bit about it, go buy the book from the author, and then go back to Amazon and write a review because that's where all the eyeballs are, right? And
right.
it is a way, because this book has to take off. It is so well written and it's so life-changing for a fiction book. It's really, really very, very good. So Greg, I want to thank you so much for taking the time here with us today. And thank you so much for writing this. I can hardly wait to get into book 2. and I will buy the updated version too when you get the updated version out. So it'll just be great. So with that, I want to thank all of our listeners who come here every day to listen to us at the Tenpenny Files at 3 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday on AmericaOutloud.news and the iHeart radio station. With that, I want to close out with one of my favorite verses from the Bible. I close all of my podcasts with, whether they are live or pre-recorded, which is Romans 12:12. Rejoice in hope, be patient in trouble, and be persistent in prayer. So we'll see you again tomorrow here at America Out Loud.news or on the iHeart radio. You can watch these in a follow-up on your favorite podcast platforms, also on X and also on Rumble. Please follow me on X at Busy Dr. T and Instagram at Busy Dr. And Instagram at Busy Dr. T. You can find out more about me personally by going to our website, which is drtenpenny.com, where you can find books and all the different things that we do. And we will have all of Greg's contact information for you on the AmericaOutloud.news platform. So with that, have a great rest of your day, everyone. We will see you here tomorrow or the next time on the Tenpenny Files. Goodbye and God bless.